So today we are here to talk about grief. As see earlier, what used to happen was grief was only related to when someone used to die or someone used to lose to death. But now, over the period of time, we have realized that the feeling of grief is not just related to someone dying. It can happen when a friendship breaks, or it can happen when your relationship ends with someone,
Hmm.
or nowadays we are traveling so much after class 12 or after our college to different cities. So leaving our home, our hometown, place where we've lived for so many years also enlightens a sense of grief within us. Or moreover, even when we are changing a job, be it in the same city, that is also a part of grieving, because see, people who are working with you tend to get attached over a period of time. So it's not just that you are shifting your job, you're leaving everything behind and going to a different aspect of your life. And to even when during COVID, I think a lot of people have gone through this when they lost their financial stability. So
Hmm.
losing financial stability is something which no one really related to, that it could be a grief. Yeah, people used to say that there might be sadness or something, but no one really felt like that is also a major loss. Losing your financial ability lose makes you lose a sense of lot more things than just the money aspect. And lastly, I
Mhm.
want to put forward is when you lose a physical ability. Say,
Hmm.
you've hurt your leg or your hand and it's fractured, or even the ability to even heal. If it is worse, even in an accident, if you are dealing with a physical ability that you've lost, that also leads to a sense of grief. So we've understood that it is any kind of loss. Today, anything which is close to us, anything that we feel is very dear to us, if that
Mhm.
is taken away from our life or if that is changed in our life, we feel a sense of grief. So today here we have Aditi. She is a senior research fellow in AIMS New Delhi Neuro Department, as well as she is a licensed clinical psychologist by the Rehabilitation Council of India. And we will be talking about what grief is, how we can understand it better, how we can be there for people who are grieving, and what are the things that we can do, the small steps we can take to make it make the process a little less tough to go by. So Aditi, we would really like to know that what is your understanding of grief?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Varuna. And I think it's very important for us to acknowledge the concept of grief. Like you very well stated, initially we understood grief as a process which is only selected to death of beloved or loss or accident. But in today's understanding, we think of, or like I understand grief as a natural response to a loss. And this loss is a subjective experience and an entirely personal experience of an individual. It deals with ranges of emotions such as sadness, anger, and even confusion. It particularly, in today's terms, even a loss of a relationship to financial losses and even some major life events can be termed as can trigger a response of grief amongst us. However, it's important for us to understand that grief is a personal experience and everybody has a unique journey to navigate through it. And there is no set particular timeline about it. So I think that's what my understanding about grief. At,
Very
at
rightly said, grief is very personal. Even though we as clinical psychologists use our diagnostic manual to assess if the person is grieving, if they have depression, or if they have anxiety, but yes, grief is very personal. There, even when it comes to practicality, we cannot really put forward that okay, you'll only be grieving for say a couple of weeks or a month. Depending on individual factors, grief can long from 1 month to 6 months to even a year, depending on how
Mhm.
the coping is of an individual. So Aditi, we would really like to know that here that who all are these people?
No worries.
Can you just enlighten us about it?
Yes, sir. Who all can experience grief? So actually, anyone can experience grief. Even it's a universal human emotion to experience it, and I think it's not even restricted to human species. Across the species, we see even animals experiencing grief. So if we start from the beginning of the developmental stages, babies and toddlers also experience grief, even if they don't have the concept of death yet developed. So by experience through their behavior, let's say by being anxious or by clinging to their caregivers, the babies experience that grief. Even like for example, the toddlers, they anticipate the return of the person, so that's also a way of coping up with the grief. Likewise, animals too experience grief. We have the famous Hachiko dog and the entire story is associated with it, that how deal, or so it's, I think it's very pertinent for us to know that human beings, and it's a constant, it's a major loss that everybody is experiencing, and I think it has some strong evolutionary roots behind it. So anyone and everyone can experience grief across all ages, across all time span, and people of different cultures, roots, and backgrounds. I think this is like one of the universal common emotions present there.
Very rightly said. I This reminds me that there was a story that even we came across where an old lady used to feed the pigeons, and when the old lady passed away, the pigeons were even grieving that loss.
Yes.
So we would even like to know, what are these types of grief that occur. People keep using different terms and different analysis take place. What are these, if you had to really like put it forward to the general population, what are these types of grief that take place?
Sure. So, grief can have various forms. One is the normal form, which, in general, in due course of time, it diminishes in intensity. However, there are various other types, such as complex grief, which takes time to process. As we hear it, sometimes necessary interventions or support system of family and friends is essential to cope up with. And then there is another form of grief called the anticipatory grief, where there is a grief before the onset of loss, and it is usually seen in people or caregivers who dealing with terminal illnesses. So they know that the loss is about to happen, and the grief sets in before that. Then there is another category called masked grief, where people experience the grief through physical or physiological symptoms. Now, there's this wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score, which explains how trauma and grief can be expressed through bodily symptoms as well. There are various forms of it. However, it's not necessary which form is more intense or less intense. I think it depends on the individual and the circumstances in which they experience that leads to any form of a grief reaction.
Yes. I think this, even in sessions, we have seen multiple times that even the slightest of things, say people who are giving exams, anticipating how tough it will be or how difficult it will be, they'll keep going through that feeling over and over again. And then what happens is you are basically living that incident twice, once in your head and once it's actually happening. So this does take place in our daily life also very frequently. So here, what would be the role of the environment or the society when we are dealing with that grief? So much is spoken about social support.
Yes. So society or an environment plays a pivotal role in coping up with grief. Let's say through the friends, families, and community members, a compassionate and empathetic approach can really ease in the burden of the individual who is coping up with grief. Because here, through support, by being just present for the individual, or letting them the access of correct resources, these are some various roles which a society or an environment can really do to support or accentuate their process of grieving. Sometimes even I think just an emotional support, or just by being present in the vicinity, can as an environment, or brings in a tremendous support, and just makes the process easier. Because I came across an article a few years ago, where it was beautifully written about how just a physical presence of another person can really make big difference in coping up a grief also requires a presence. It needs someone in front of whom we can grieve. So I would say that a supportive society plays a crucial role in the process of healing through.
Even in the Indian society, we've seen that our rituals are also oriented
Mm.
to how to process grief. There's a reason why these 13 days people are there in the person's life. They're there around them. If not, nothing. Because see, I am sure that everyone must have been in a situation like this where they lost someone to close to death, and maybe you're grieving for some time, but eventually after the third and the fourth day, everyone starts mingling up. They start talking about their lives, so that also helps the person ease into their daily lives eventually. Obviously it will
Mhm.
not completely take the pain away, but it helps to buckle up back into the society, into their day-to-day activities also. So Aditi, if you could just help us enlighten a few points on how we could overcome this grief if we have to do it individually.
Yeah. So that's a wonderful question here, Varna. Overcoming grief is actually an individual's journey, and it starts by just acknowledging and accepting that we are grieving. It starts from that process, and then seeking support from friends, family members, or a therapist if required. And eventually, when we are overcoming the process of grief, the most pertinent thing that we see here is that the people lose touch with their daily routine activities. So taking care of ourselves through right nutritious diet, a correct circadian rhythm, like maintaining a healthy sleep, and having a physical exercise. I think these three basic activities can help us maintain our basic daily routine and parallelly working on this. So coping up with grief, again, it depends on from situation to situation. Let's say if we are dealing with the personal loss or by death of someone, um, remembering them or honoring them and doing certain activities in their memory can help us cope up with the grieving process. Maintaining a social circle or being in touch with our support system can help ease in or ease in the process. Let's say if we are dealing with the loss and a grief because of a relationship, let's say a loss of a relationship is also a grieving process. Here I think creating another routine, uh, an active way of routine, or along with the new activities to keep us involved and give a new meaning of life. So moreover, basically reflecting about the relationship and having a different perspective about it, and by being empathetic towards ourselves and compassionate towards ourselves, can help in the process of overcoming the process of grief. Overall, if I'll have to summarize, I would say that overcoming grief is basically accepting that loss and integrating it in our life in a very healthy manner.
Very nicely said. So here the thing that one thing to avoid would be my suggestion to not say that this will pass,
Mhm.
or it's okay. So many people have lost. Just don't. Sometimes saying nothing is better than being there rather than these statements, because then you're just undermining how the intensity of the feeling the individual is having. So
Mhm.
not to just tell that this will pass by. The person also is somewhere aware that this will pass by, but eventually, just be there. Just tell them that okay, you're here if you need to, if you need them to talk or vent or everything. Just making sure that you are more approachable and available rather than to give them those generic statements like this will be okay.
Mhm.
Eventually be all right. Time is something which irrespective makes like keeps going on, and life keeps going on, but we don't have to at that moment, we don't have to put it forward to individual. So just a few pointers on if what all things besides these if we could keep in our minds when someone else is grieving, if you could
Yeah,
help us.
that's a wonderful question, and I also come across it in our sessions. Like, what do we do when we see our beloved ones grieving over a loss? So, as we can empathize with them and understand or also share their part. However, sometimes it becomes difficult for us to see the grieving person, uh, go through that difficult and distress, because it's a distressing emotion altogether. However, it's essential for us to go through it. When we see someone going grieving, I think being there, emotionally there for them, and being as a support is really helpful. I think that's how it somewhere mingles with the role of the society and the environment that plays role. Supportive society, supportive, being there for them, letting them more specifically, as we'll try to ensure that we let them go through that process without putting them the burden of our expectations as we expect them to come out of the grief. Because every individual has their own unique way and journey of dealing and navigating through the grief. And even if we want that them to come out or heal through it fast, I think people take their own pace and their own time to figure out and come out of it, and I think that should be respected. Being there for them without judgment, and giving a safe space for them to express it. The more they express it, the more they'll be feeling validated, and the easier it will be for them to cope up with it grief. If it doesn't work, I think encouraging them to seek professional help and keeping a check on them on a regular basis can also, in a compassionate manner, can help them navigate through grief more effectively.
Right. And I think I think one thing which is majorly happening is that I want friends and family to be more open about the fact that if someone is losing a friend, not that by death, but the friendship breaks, or if there is a relationship break, to actually be there for your child or your cousin or your friend, because that is something which is getting tough to deal with, because people looking at social media and seeing everyone has a perfect life is just getting to the people who some,
Mm.
and it's not that no one else, people who are showing in social media their life is perfect, but this is something which is taking place right now, I feel.
Summed it up very well. This is indeed there. I mean, kids go through difficult emotional turmoil through from breakup to academic distress all alone, and we see them going through it. Even like an academic loss is also a grief for them. It's at a young tender age, and at that particular age, very significant grief or loss, emotional loss can happen, and addressing that in an empathetic manner is crucial.
Right. If anyone would like to ask any questions, you're most welcome. You can drop it in the chat if there are any questions that come up. But I think this is roughly, we just wanted to provide with an orientation that what grief is, how it can be in different aspects of our life, and not necessarily we are, maybe we'll take a session next where what are these stages of grief that people keep talking about, and talk
Mhm.
about how it's not really those stages and how we keep going up and down before we actually reach that level of acceptance. So maybe that is something we can take up next session, but just an introductory on how we feel grief and how others feel, and how the processing is different for everyone. I think if Aditi would like to say anything before we wrap up today's session.
And I'd definitely like to conclude by saying, thank you so much for giving me the chance to, talk about grief. It's actually not very well. There are many misconceptions and myths associated with it. Some of it, and that actually leads people to conceal their griefs and not talk about it. But if sometimes, and that actually leads to complex forms of grief later on. It can take different forms. It can take different uh, um, symptoms. It can come and manifest in different ways. So I think by addressing it, the emotions that you experience, the loss and missing someone is a very genuine and a valid emotion. And it takes time for us to go through it. I think, like you said, it's essential for us to give ourselves the right time and space to overcome the grief at our own pace.
Right, right. I think I'm so glad that you could join us on a Sunday morning, and enlighten us about these few basic concepts as simply as possible. Thank you so much for being here. I hope everyone else also had a nice time getting to know a little bit about the general feelings that we are coming up across day in day out. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you so much.